All right, what's going on, guys? John Zannis, Joe Haggerty here, and we are talking hockey, even though there's not a lot of hockey to talk about. Well, not a lot of Bruins hockey to talk about. There's things going on. Haggs' best buddy, Kyle Dubas, got a new job. Bruce Cassidy is taunting us all with a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals, taking on the Florida Panthers. Just a constant reminder of the Bruins' failures, and we're here kind of waiting for something to happen, and it is a bit of a sit-on-your-hands sort of offseason for the Bruins, but one that's, Joe, going to have a lot of stuff happen in it simply because it has to. The Bruins have to get creative. They have to make some moves. They have to find a way to move some pieces in order to keep some pieces and bring in some new ones. So stuff is going to happen. It's just not happening yet, and we are going to get into it. Yeah.
They will be making moves, Zannis, but they are not making them right now. And over the last week, the biggest news was they walked away from their 6th-round Finnish draft pick from 2019, Matthias Mantikivi, who we will probably never hear from again. And people wrote about this, like they need to keep this guy
because those people need to keep their jobs, is what they need to do, and they have to generate some content.
He's a second-line center in the Finnish Elite League, which is not that great to begin with, and clearly they felt fine walking away from him, and felt like he was going to be just not an NHL player here. So it's kind of a waste of a 6th-round pick, but it speaks to the tumbleweeds that are rolling through the Boston Bruins news ranks right now. There's just not a lot going on. The biggest thing we're going to hear over the next 2 weeks with the Florida Panthers and the Golden Knights playing each other is the Bruce Cassidy think pieces, Bob Lobel style. Why don't we get guys like this? Are going to continue to get cranked out, especially if the Knights end up winning, and we'll see what happens over the 7-game series.
Those tough guy coaches, Joe, they're always great in the first couple of years, and then people start to tune them out. So, just because it works there doesn't mean it would have worked here. You get tuned out, you've been tuned out, and that's that.
Definitely not that guy with the players that were still here. No, it was not happening anymore. And that's the way it is.
It's how that works. It's how it goes. They just eventually you just lose the room. The podcast, we should tell you, is brought to you by a couple of sponsors. Number one is our friends over at Factor Meals. That is America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. All you have to do is go to factormeals.com/Haggs50. Use the code Haggs50, get 50% off your first box. Also, our exclusive wagering partner, FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you go to fanduel.com/Boston and sign up today, you can take advantage of a special deal where you get $1,000 in no sweat first bet back returned to you if you lose a bet. That's $1,000 in bonus bucks. FanDuel.com/Boston. Go check that out. Let's get into some stuff, and this is going to be a straight-up mailbag style Hacks with Hags podcast, and I'll fold in a small piece of Bruins news to kind of get us started. And again, you're looking for any sort of nuggets at this time of year to give you something to have conversations and to sink your teeth into. And one of the things is, Bruins brought in a lot of guys at the deadline, have some players on their roster they'd like to find a way to keep around. The problem is they have no money, and they're into a tax because of some of the trickery with Bergeron and Krejci, and they really, really, really just have no cap flexibility. So they're going to have to get creative. But a report here from Sportsnet's Elliot Friedman, in a recent column, this was a couple of days ago, Boston is exploring what it needs to do to keep Tyler Bertuzzi, who's slated to be an unrestricted free agent this summer. I'm going to start with Christopher Baker, Senior on Facebook, who's asking you, any shot at signing Bertuzzi or Orlov? We'll get to Dmitry Orlov as well, but just kind of start out with Bertuzzi. As we've said before, Hags, on this show, and I'm sure you've talked about and written about 1,000 times, great guy, quintessential Bruin. You'd love to keep him if you could. It's just hard.
Yeah, no, it's complicated, and that's why there's a lot of due diligence from the Bruins end that goes into, retaining a guy like that, because you've got to not only figure out how it's going to work salary cap wise, how are you going to be able to move some pieces to free up the space. You have to figure out, and Don Sweeney's been very good at this as general manager of the Boston Bruins, figuring out a way for him to take a little bit less than what he would probably take on the open market, because I think he's a $5 to $6 million a year player for the Bruins, and he's probably more than that if he gets to free agency, based on the playoff that he had, based on that he's only a year removed from scoring 30 goals. He's got some things that are working for him that I think, in the hard-nosed style, as you referenced, that makes him a pretty good, effective Bruins player, is going to be attractive to other teams. And really, the playoff, the way he played in the playoffs, he's one of the best Bruins forwards, most effective, led them in points, leading scorer in that first-round series against the Florida Panthers. That's going to up his value if he gets to the open free agency and unrestricted free agency. So, when Don Sweeney had his end-of-season press conference, he made it fairly clear, and I was surprised he even said this, that they were hoping to retain one of the three rental players that they traded for at the trade deadline: Bertuzzi, Dmitry Orlov, and Garnet Hathaway. Hathaway, too expensive a luxury item on as a bottom six player on the Boston Bruins. Did not have a great playoff. I think you thank him for his service, and he's going to move on somewhere else. Even though he's a great local Maine kid, he's going to go some other destination. It's not going to be with Boston. Dmitry Orlov, I think too expensive. He's going to be able to get more in the open market. They have a surplus of defensemen. That's not really an area where they can afford to bring in even more players than they already have. Bertuzzi, they only have 7 forwards signed. They need to bring in some forwards. They need to figure out a way to get a couple of forwards, either retaining them or bringing them from the outside. Certainly, they're going to bring up young forwards as well, but they need forwards, big time. You add that to, he showed great chemistry, Bertuzzi, with David Pastrnak. I think that's something the Bruins are going to pay a lot of attention to, that he was setting up Pastrnak a lot, and that's of value, huge value to the Bruins moving forward. The fact he was so effective in the playoffs, and now not only in his first time in the playoffs at the NHL level, he was very effective for the Bruins. He also was an excellent playoff player in the AHL before he made it up to the Red Wings. So you look at that and you say, all right, this is a guy that's going to be effective in the postseason. That's a very high value to the Bruins. So there's a lot of reasons, in addition to him being a great net front guy on the power play. He showed that during the postseason and down the stretch as well. There's a lot of pluses and a lot of things you like about his game that I think the Bruins are going to want to retain him and bring him back. But, to your point, they're going to have to make moves to make that happen. They're going to have to get him to get with the program and take a little less. And, they're going to have to make sure that they, don't overload with a guy that is a winger when they still have centers that they've got to, figure out. The down the middle with Bergeron and Krejci, unresolved and undecided at this point. So there's a lot of balls up in the air that Sweeney's trying to juggle at this point, especially even weeks away from free agency right now. But I think Bertuzzi is a priority for them to bring back. And I think if there's one guy that they traded for at the deadline among those rental players, it's going to be Bertuzzi. And he should be a priority for the Bruins based on the way that he played.
Yep. Let's move on. And Bertuzzi's a big story. The other ones are basically, look, the dominoes that have to fall first are the Bergeron and Krejci dominoes. So we'll start with this comment, and I'll kind of piggyback off of this from Dan Kinsella, also from Facebook.
Yep.
Krejci and Bergeron, well, kind of phrased in the form of a question, Krejci and Bergeron are not coming back through the doors this year? Question mark. Are they? So I'll ask you this. I don't know what you know, and obviously that's what you're the insider. We'll ask your kind of whether you're hearing any extra buzz here. But also just for people at home, is not knowing now or still not knowing change your thoughts on what they may do? Because I don't know when NHL players start ramping it up, but you have to think it's soon-ish, maybe in the next few weeks or by July. You got to start getting serious about getting yourself back into shape and ramping up whatever it is you're going to do. So you've got to make that decision that you're going to start doing that sooner than later, right? Like, how much longer can this drag with them saying no? Or are they waiting until the Cup Finals and not detract anything and do the responsible thing and that's that? But does not knowing surprise you in any way? Do you think we should know by now, and does it change your thinking at all?
No, I think that they were pretty firm. Bergeron especially. Krejci was a little more vague about his timeline or when he's going to make the decision, but Bergeron, I think, was pretty firm that he was going to say something to the Bruins and be concrete about it by June, because he didn't want it to linger and drag on like it did last year. Yeah, we're there.
We're here.
So any point now, but like to your point, I think, after the Stanley Cup Finals are over, before the draft happens, certainly before free agency starts, I think we're going to get decisions from them. And my feel, and I think they need them. That this talk from Don Sweeney about just like last year, going down multiple tracks of whether you have Krejci and Bergeron or you don't, and sort of these two paths and these two plans that you're going to go on into the offseason based on one or the other. I mean, it's just too extreme to be able to make two plans like that. And why do that? It's a waste of time. Just get an answer from them in the next couple of weeks. And I think it will be an easier answer from them this time around because there's not a coaching change.
They have to know before the draft.
There was a reason there was a delay last year, and I think it had to do with the coaching situation. I think that was a big part of it.
The players don't. Bergie doesn't want his reputation tarnished.
No, well, it's obvious, right? Just put 2 and 2 together and get 4. But as far as this year goes, my feeling, I'm not sure Krejci's going to be back. I don't think it's hard for him, and I think we've mentioned this before. His family, his wife and kids were in South Carolina all year. He was gone from his family the entire season. And he was up here playing, and there were pluses and minuses to that. I think he had some fun on some levels, but let's be honest, we're both dads, we have kids. You're gonna miss your kids if you don't see them for weeks or months at a time. It's crazy, that's not sustainable. It's very hard to do that. Yeah. And he admitted after the season was over that it was touch and go a couple of times where they were talking about should they just pull the ripcord on the whole thing, if it's not working. So. For him, I think it's a tougher sell. I think he may not be back. For Patrice Bergeron, I still think there's a big pullback to have one more run, to put another decent cast around him, to try to make as good a team as possible. And maybe you make some smarter decisions, some more prudent decisions down the stretch and into the playoffs, and you learn from what happened last year so you're not all banged up after going for an NHL record, all these players going into the postseason like what happened this year. I mean, hindsight being 2020 now, you can look at it and say they made some mistakes down the stretch trying to push towards, things they shouldn't have. They really should have pulled back the reins even more than they did, with guys getting hurt. And some of it you can't avoid, but some of it I think you look at it and say, yeah, they obviously wanted the record. That obviously became a priority to them. And was it to the detriment of their playoff chances based on some guys getting dinged up towards the end? Namely Lindholm, Bergeron, Ullmark. Three huge pieces that were very subpar in the playoffs after suffering injuries down the stretch in the regular season. So, but to get back to what you were saying, I don't think Bergeron wants to go out with that being the last game that he played. I think he's a competitor. I think he's a proud guy. I think he's got a reputation as a winner. I think the thought of that being the last game, him losing on home ice in Game 7 against the Florida Panthers, after they set a record during the NHL season, after they were the number 1 seed, losing to the 8th seed, I just don't think he can go out like that. And the fact that he's still a very effective player that, is probably going to win the Selke Trophy again this year, I think that might all push him to come back. The question is it going to be as good a team next year as it was this past year? And I think the answer is no, but to what degree, we'll have to see.
Yep. We're going to keep rolling on with these comments here. And as we said, a Pucks with Haggs mailbag. We'll try to rip through a few more here in the back half of the show. We want to tell you quickly about one of those sponsors we mentioned at the top of the show, and that is Factor Meals. And it is almost summertime, pretty much summer. We're mentally checked out like it's summer. So
it's June. It's summer, Zannis.
It's
summer in 10 days or whatever. It's summer.
Let's get moving. So you might be looking for some wholesome, convenient meals for those sunny, active days, and that's where Factor Meals come in. It's America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Help you fuel up fast, flavorful, nutritious, ready-to-eat meals delivered right to your door. And again, that's kind of what it all comes down to. You want to be on the go. You don't want to sit around hot kitchen cooking all the time. Bang, Factor Meals, fresh, never frozen, ready in 2 minutes. All you have to do is heat it up and go, and then get back outside, soak up the warm weather. Calorie conscious options if you want it. That's meals under 550 calories. Protein plus meals with 30 plus grams of protein or more per serving. Whatever it is you're looking for, choose from 34 plus chef prepared, dietitian approved weekly options featuring premium ingredients, fresh, wholesome ingredients, whatever you want. You can tailor it to your specifications, the type of stuff you want to eat, type of diet you want to be on. It's faster and cheaper than takeout, restaurant quality food, as we said, delivered to your door. So for the deal, head to factormeals.com/Haggs50. Use that code Haggs50, that's Haggs 50, and get 50% off your first box. That's a really good deal. Take advantage of it now. Once again, factormeals.com/Haggs, Haggs 50. Use the code Haggs50. Get 50% off that first meal. We talked a little bit about creativity here. I'm going to stack two comments together here. They got to get creative, which means they got to move things. We've talked about on this pod, Joe, that defensemen is where they don't have a lot of forwards under contract, but they have an embarrassment of riches with their decor right now. So I'm gonna put two together. I got Ron sending me a message. Ron from Newton. Any chance the Bruins are feeling a little buyer's remorse regarding Hampus Lindholm and might consider trying to move him early in his deal? And then here's another one for you. Somebody throwing out here. What do you think? And this is from Michael Weissman from Facebook. What do you think of this trade? McAvoy to the New York Islanders, his hometown, for Brock Nelson, Noah Dobson, pretty much cap neutral, and gets you a 1C and a young right-handed defense with more offensive potential. Whether or not that deal makes sense or not, the idea of trading one of the stalwarts here, and if you look at this team, you would think the core players that are lined up right now is Pasternak, those two D guys, Lindholm and McAvoy, and then theoretically Ullmark, who's here on a cheap deal, who you're certain is getting traded. We're not even going to talk about Linus right now. But among those two, it makes sense. We've talked about Grizz. We've talked about Carlo. We've talked about, Forbert. If someone bites on Riley as things, nibbles, just basically just get this money off my books, give me a little something, but give me some relief. But what about flipping those guys to land a big fish or something else of value greater than your defense? Could you consider either? I personally, I view McAvoy as close to unmovable, but the Lindholm thing wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, I would put Pasternak, McAvoy as untouchables.
Agree.
I just think Marchand, just given his importance to the team, the fact he's probably going to be the next captain when Bergeron is gone, I don't think it's going to be McAvoy. I think he's kind of an untouchable for those reasons as well. Even though he's aging into a place where, depending on where the Bruins are, you could really cash out and get high value for him. But I just think given his esteem within the organization, and where his place, it's just not going to happen. But I would also, I would not move Lindholm. Like, obviously, there have been some trouble signs in the last couple of postseasons. He's been banged up. He got destroyed, pulverized in that series against Carolina, a huge hit behind the net, not his fault. But that obviously, impacted him and knocked him out as a factor in that series. And then we hear from Sweden, weeks after this playoff where he didn't have any points, that he was playing through a fractured foot, which felt to me, kind of like he was taking a detour into Excuseville when he was on the train back to Sweden.
Yeah.
But, I just think right now, especially with the questions about the center position for the Bruins, your team is going to be built around two number one defensemen, around two horses that are in their 20s, around two guys that play 25-plus minutes and great in all situations. Even if Hampus Lindholm turns out to be somewhat of a dud or a guy that is not as good in the playoffs as he is in the regular season, for $6 million a year, he is of tremendous value as a guy that plays 25 minutes a night and does what he does in the regular season. They basically are turning, I think, their key structure on their roster into the two number one defensemen, 1 and 1A defensemen, that everything else is going to sort of center around that or be built around that and the goaltending.
Yeah.
and like until you and you know, I like Nelson as a player, Brock Nelson, but like he's not Patrice Bergeron. He's, you know, he's fine, but he's not like this guy that is going to be a game changer as far as you're going to build your whole team around him. You know, we're talking about an Islanders team that was nothing to write home about this year either. So I'm not going to trade McAvoy in that trade. B, I don't think I'm going to trade McAvoy at all. And the Lindholm thing, I don't buy that they're shopping him or that they have buyer's remorse.
Oh, I'm not saying they do. I'm saying, would one consider well, this is a big deal. Maybe I want to get out. And again, I agree. I mean, you're looking at $8 million with the bonuses for a couple of years, but again, it's 6.5 of what his AAV is. Right. Again, that's a bargain. You're paying 3.5 or 4 these days for third line forward. So like 6.5 for a top pairing defenseman. Is I mean the type that a top pairing left shot defenseman that they've been chasing like a white whale for how long? They finally have one. It's something that is seemingly affordable. I think you'd have to get a good haul there to consider moving that.
The issue with him just becomes how much
can he hold up?
How much is he a guy that plays like Tarzan during the regular season and plays like Jane in the playoffs? You know, like is he that guy? You know, that's really what it comes down to him, and you have to make that determination. And I think I'd like to see him in another playoff before I would completely make that determination, because like you're going to need him in the regular season to get to the playoffs. You're absolutely going to need the both of those guys to get to that point. And then you can sort of live with, you know, if he's hit or miss, or if he's totally bad in the playoffs, or if you feel like he, you know, succumbed to the pressure and he wasn't up to the challenge, and like you saw things, if you were the Bruins coaches, that made you concerned about him in the postseason, and like when the pressure was on his shoulders, like all that stuff we'll see. But I think I'd like to see him get at least one more crack where maybe he can be healthy in the postseason and we see if he's a different kind of player. Because I feel like he had like 50 games of playoff experience before he even got to Boston. And, it seems to me that he was fine when he was in Anaheim. You know, maybe it's the Boston market that's a problem with him. I have no idea. But, you know, I'd like to see at least one more sample size of a playoff from Hampus Lindholm before you start giving up on a player that's a really good contract, was a high first-round pick, and, you know, as looked in this regular season like he was the answer for you along with McAvoy to your defenseman situation for, you know, the next 5+ years. So, like, I'm not ready to, like, cash in on any of that. And I just don't think the Bruins roster is either, based on the way it's built right now.
Yep. Let's move on. We'll get a couple more here, I think, before we wrap this up. We touched on this briefly, but from Mary Sullivan at Facebook, there's a couple people here kind of banging on this drum. I think Bruce Cassidy got a raw deal with Boston firing him. I don't think that that's wrong, but I think it still was necessary based on everything we've heard since it happened. But look at where he is now. You go, Bruce, and hope your team wins Lord Stanley. And Joe, as we talked about, there's a borderline mutiny that led to his firing, with the players, your core players, pretty much whispering in management's ear, I can't play for this guy. I don't know how fans at home could sit back and think this guy was the answer, despite what you feel about Jim Montgomery after watching him flail around in that playoff series and not really do the best job for the team there. If you might not love what Montgomery did with the team in the playoffs, that doesn't mean that Cassidy was the guy that this team needed.
No.
And we all loved Bruce, but I mean, obviously the players did not.
The problem becomes, I think, is that you look, a lot of like hockey fans and, you know, Bruins fans, maybe they're not fans of the NHL, but they're fans of the Bruins. I think they look at it through the lens of other sports as far as coaches go. You know, and coaches that are in the same place for 20 years, 15 years, the Belichick that like gets to his spot in New England and stays there forever. And I know it's a bad example because he's probably the best coach in NFL history. But like the point being, I think there's a much longer longevity for a lot of managers and head coaches in other sports where there is not longevity in the NHL, nor has there ever been. I think they are more disposable in the NHL than in any other league. I think there's much more of a phenomenon of getting a bounce after you fire the head coach and bring in somebody else in the NHL more than any place else. I think there's much more of players tuning out and having mutinies, like you mentioned, in the NHL than other places where the message just isn't going through anymore. And I think you kind of have to like make peace with that if you're a hockey fan and say, you know what? Bruce Cassidy's an excellent hockey coach.
Yep.
Clearly, he's having success with the Vegas Golden Knights. He was exactly what they needed. He has bonded with Jack Eichel and is getting him to play some of the best hockey of his career. And it's kind of turned around a guy in Eichel whose reputation was a bit spotty coming out of Buffalo. And he had, dings against him. But, he's managed to get the best out of him,
The likelihood that Eichel's not going to turn on Bruce within a couple of years based on his track record is 1,000%.
Exactly, but it's working right now.
There's no way that doesn't go bad eventually.
Absolutely. It is going to blow up like Mount Vesuvius 2 years from now in Vegas. It'll be like they should have a Vesuvius
But they might get a cup out of it.
Where Eichel could just blow up, on a daily basis at the casino against Bruce Cassidy. But that's going to happen for sure. But right now he is the right coach at the right time for that team, and he was no longer the right coach at the right time for the Boston Bruins. There were too many players that I don't think wanted to play for him anymore, that were tired of the message that they were hearing. And I think based on some of the stuff that he did, and we talked about this a week or two ago in a Q&A that he had, I think he came to realize that he was too hard on some players when he was here in Boston. And I think the fact that he came so close to winning the cup but not winning it here kind of pushed him into this intense zone over the couple years after that, where he kept trying to push harder on players, and it got to a point where it was too much. And I think he understands that now, and he realizes that, and it's, he's self-aware enough to get that. But you move on and you go somewhere else. And I think the way the Bruins played in the regular season for Montgomery with the, it's going to be a sunshiny day Brady Bunch song. Everything is awesome with the Bruins all season. There were no negativity at all. It was the right fit for them at that point. The positivity that he was bringing to the table, almost that sort of college hockey coach sort of philosophy and rah-rah style. It worked for the Bruins. It obviously didn't work in the playoffs, and I think at that point, Montgomery needed to adjust, and I think he's going to learn from that experience moving forward. But I'm going to be watching him closely. It was a good step that he admitted accountability and that he made a lot of mistakes when he talked to us at the end of the season. Yeah. But I'm going to be watching him very closely depending on what kind of players he has. And He's going to have to change that message because it absolutely, if Bergeron's gone, it's going to have to change, because I think that was a big part of why things were the way they were this year. And it'll be interesting to see how it moves forward.
It's tough. Some coaches come in and they want to be mellow. They want to let the room lead.
Yeah.
They want to be your friend. They want to be the player's coach. Some guys come in and they're hard asses from the get-go. You've seen success both ways, and you never really know. But the one thing you do know, if you're not striking a balance, if you're just a hard guy the whole time, eventually people are going to get sick of you. And if you're too much of a pushover, you're going to get walked all over. So I mean, it really is difficult to hold that room for a long period of time. You have to be consistent in your approach and how you do it. But again, the Cassidy thing wore thin with the players clearly, and they were ready to move on. So again, anybody out there who's still thinking, oh, Bruce is there, and it doesn't mean it would have worked here. It absolutely doesn't.
They would not have, if Bruce Cassidy stayed as coach, they would have not have won 65 games. They would have not have gotten 135 points, and he would have not have made it through the regular season.
Yeah,
as the coach. He was in the last year of his deal. He would have gotten fired, and they would have brought somebody else in. Exactly. It wouldn't have been the solution. That's why
the Bruins were ready to extend him until they decided to fire him. That's how dire it was. In Bruins management eyes, they were ready to extend him, and then they heard from the players, and that was that. So that's got to tell you everything. I've always thought it doesn't matter the sport, Joe. I'm 100% on this. Look, there's tactical things you can do. There's a bunch of different things that coaches do. And how much they actually impact what happens on the ice, I think really more happens not in game, but really more of whether or not you can get guys to play for you. And once you have a mutiny, or once you have the players that don't want to be around you anymore and have tuned you out, you're toast. So, and that's
the highest level, in the highest levels of pro sports, the ones that we cover, it's made more about managing personalities than it is about the X's and O's. There's zero question about that. That's why they get paid the money they do. And that's why some guys have difficulty. Look at it in the NBA, where so much of the argument with Joe Mazzulla is about, do the players buy into what he's selling? Do they respect him? Are they going to listen to him? All that stuff. It's about that.
Yeah.
It's about getting their attention and getting them to buy into whatever you're selling. It's not
Yeah.
about your actual strategy because they all know what they're doing at that level.
They have a good exactly. So let's quickly tell you. And again, we still got a question or two to go here. Want to quickly tell you about another sponsor, of course, FanDuel, exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network. NHL playoffs, as we know, Stanley Cup is getting underway. NBA Finals as well. FanDuel is the official sponsor of the NBA, and as we said, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network. So head on over, sign up right now, FanDuel.com/Boston. Take advantage of the special offer, a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. It's a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. In addition to that deal, there's great promotions every single day. It's a super safe and easy to download app. Put it on your phone. It's incredibly easy to use. Whether you want to get involved in game betting or props or futures, hammer the under on the Patriots over-under for wins. 7.5, I think, despite how awesome Tyquan Thornton looked running around in shorts on Wednesday. I was there. He did look good, but that's beside the point. But again,
Mac Jones right now, Zannis, apparently.
FanDuel.com/Boston. All right, let's roll through a couple more here. And so this one is interesting. I think when the Bruins go out, I think it's just a spray of blame, right? And so we looked at the players. You talked about injuries. Montgomery got his fair share. But Sweeney, for maybe the first time ever, upper management, for the first time ever, I think most people, us in the media and most fans were like, well, I mean, he did his part, right? But you've got a couple of people on Facebook here that aren't super happy, and here's why. Everyone would have been super happy with Don Sweeney if they won the cup because they sold out for the cup. But when you don't win the cup, then what you do is you go home and you have no furniture and you have no clothes and the cupboards are bare and you freak out and say, how did this happen? How do we have nothing? And that's where we're at with the Bruins right now in terms of what's going on with what's left here. So I got a couple of comments here. Let's cycle in on one of them. Did Don Sweeney, this comes from Metal Bruins Patriots, oh my. Okay.
This guy is a Twitter follower of mine, and he really does not like Don Sweeney. So
let's go
into it with that filter.
It's one of two. I will say CC Nixon also took a shot on Facebook here.
Yes.
But we'll go with Metal Bruins Patriots, oh my, saying, did Sweeney mention at the end of the year availability if he was accountable for any of this? The Bruins having the NHL's worst draft capital, worst salary cap issues, one of the NHL's worst farm systems, choking in the playoffs all 8 years of his tenure as GM, and firing Cassidy, who clearly wasn't the issue. Look, everyone wanted Don Sweeney to do everything he did.
Yes.
I've been critical. Joe's been critical. A lot of people have been critical in the media of Don Sweeney. The 2015 draft will forever go down in infamy as one of the biggest muck jobs of any, whatever. It happens. Missing on some other draft picks, sure. Trading draft picks for non-impact guys, sure. Everyone wanted him to do what he did. To go trade for a guy like Hampus Lindholm a year ago, to give up what they gave up and to sign him to a long-term deal was a win. And then this year to go out and get a Tyler Bertuzzi and a Garnet Hathaway and a Dmitry Orlov, expending more draft capital to make sure you had a roster that couldn't possibly lose to an 8 seed in the first round, right? Impossible. But that's what he was doing, is I am removing all doubt. It ended up not working, but it should have worked. Everyone wanted this to happen. And now you've got what you've got. You don't have any prospects, and that's a problem. You have not done great with your drafting, and you have no picks right now. And rightfully, some people are freaked out about that, but you can't have it both ways.
No, and look, some of the comments or some of the things are also over-exaggerating, like saying that they've choked every postseason under Don.
I agree. Yeah.
They got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final in 2019. Granted, they did not play well in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final in 2019, but you can't really say they choked in the playoffs when they got to the final game of the hockey season, all the way through the playoffs. And I think they've had they've had mixed results in the playoffs. I do think, there's been some chances for, the legacies to really be cemented by some of those players on the Boston Bruins in these playoff runs. Then they did not do it. It did. And, your friend and mine, Mike Felger, has long looked at them as kind of a one-hit wonder with winning in 2011. And aside from that, underachieving, even though they've got this reputation as great players and winners. And, I think I've mentioned it before. I almost say that they're like the Atlanta Braves of the NHL now, where they've won a bunch of division titles. They constantly are in the mix in the playoffs, and they've been around it, but they've only won the big series once. But like, to your point, this year is the one year where Don Sweeney should have a jacket where everything's bouncing off of him. He should be Teflon Don Sweeney right now based on the moves that he made this year, because I don't think you can question any of them, because he was going for it and everybody wanted him to go for it, and he was right in doing that with an aging cast, going in it all in for one more time, knowing, with the contracts they signed to Krejci and Bergeron, they were going to have to pay forward with those this season. And knowing everything that they knew, they squeezed everything they could out of the long-term injured reserve to bring in players. They even went out and got Bertuzzi on top of that. And, that's the only thing I criticized Don Sweeney for at all, is giving up the first-round pick for Bertuzzi, because you really went all in at that point to get
the little luxury item there.
And you really sort of mortgaged everything in your future. But like, some people, some wise guys will look at that and say, well, you know what? Don Sweeney wants to trade those first-round picks so he can't get slammed for him when he, trades a bust drafts a bust in the first round, which he's had very mixed results with his first-round picks. Even, Fabian Lysell, a guy that, he was lauded for taking, now is kind of having problems. And, Beecher, who they selected a few years ago in the first round, looks like he's going to be kind of a third rounder at best, fourth rounder, Trent Frederick at best, maybe. So, I think on the one hand, I think you've got to view Don Sweeney this way, right? He's got his strengths and his weaknesses, just like every other NHL general manager. I think you've got to give him credit for his strengths, and you got to give him credit for the things that he does well. He's made some really good trades. I remember wondering why the hell they signed Linus Ullmark when they did. I thought it didn't make any sense to bring him in, especially where Swayman had shown that he was, on his way to being a pretty good NHL goaltender. But at the end of the day, he was right. And part of the reason they won, they set all the records they did this year is because Ullmark turned into the goalie that they thought he was during the regular season. And now he's got on a decent contract where he's making $5 million a year, and he's probably going to win the Vezina Trophy. So he's going to have high value on the trade market if you want to go out and deal him, if you want to kind of pump and dump him after you got the best of him this year during the regular season. So, you mentioned the Lindholm trade. That was huge. And getting Taylor Hall to come here and on a decent contract. Getting Patrice Bergeron to sign for less. Like a lot of the things that he's done over the years, you've got to give him credit for. He's good at getting players to sign for less to stay here. He's good at making NHL trade deadline trades. He's good at finding, undrafted college free agents and turning them into decent players. He's good at maximizing the long-term injured reserve to get the most that he can under the salary cap here. Yes, that turns into you painting yourself into a corner salary cap-wise, but guess what? If you're a good team, and you're a good team for an extended period of time, you're going to be in salary cap turmoil no matter what. That is how the NHL works. If you are a good team for 5+ years, you're going to end up in salary cap jail, and you're going to end up in trouble under the hard cap in the NHL. That's just the way the system works. Blaming Don Sweeney for that and saying it's all his fault when basically that's the system that's in place, it's not fair. You're expecting him to play by a different set of rules than everybody else in the league. So, he's made mistakes, but I think he's gotten better as the GM as he's moved along, and I think he's one of the best GMs in the league, even if Zannis, he has no furniture, he has nothing in savings anymore, and he's given away all the gold in the safe and has nothing of value in the house anymore because he gave it up trying to win last year.
Okay, one last question coming from Bird from 3 from Twitter, submitted to me here. If Bergeron, Krejci, Bertuzzi, Orlov all leave, Joe, what's the ceiling for this team?
Say those names again.
If Bergeron, Krejci, retire. Orlov and Bertuzzi all go. What is the ceiling for this team?
I still think they're a playoff team. Like, I still think they'll be good enough defensively. They'll be good enough goaltending wise. They're going to have Pasternak's a 60-goal scorer. Brad Marchand will be back. They're going to be just good enough, I think, to make the playoffs. Are they going to be a salary cap contender? Absolutely not. But I think they will be in the middle, and they'll be good enough to make the play. Like, people think if those guys leave, they're going to bottom out and they're going to be terrible. They're not. They've got enough good pieces between McAvoy, Lindholm, Allmark, Swayman, Pasternak, Marchand. You know, they still have Taylor Hall signed. They've got some other players. Even if they backfill with a bunch of young guys, cheap guys on the roster, and they have to kind of struggle to fill out the roster because of the salary cap, they're still going to be a playoff team. I am convinced of that. Okay. Even though the Atlantic Division and the Eastern Conference are getting better, I think, especially in their division, teams are getting much, much better. Buffalo's on the rise. Detroit's getting better. Look at where Florida is. Like, it's going to be stiff competition, but I still think they make the playoffs.
For what it's worth, I would say most Bruins analysts entering this season had them at that this year.
Yes.
So just to be fair, playoff contender in the mix there, possibly, a top three, sneaking, not just a, wild card team.
Yep.
So we'll see. I'm going to piggyback on that and add one more myself off the back end of that. Let's go doomsday. And again, this is way down the road, but let's go doomsday in that you aren't able to re-sign any of those people or get creative in trades. So you just kind of come back with what you currently have on your roster and fill in with some 4A guys who aren't, ready for prime time on the back end, on your third and fourth lines and your, whatever you have to do there. And that's the best you can do. And things are going horribly, and you look like you're on the outside looking in. Do you consider a full-scale fire sale at the deadline and just say, well, we did our best. Let's start the process. Can you see a world in which this team ever does that?
No. Do you think they're going to do that in the Centennial season?
I'm just saying.
No, I know you're being devil's advocate, but I'm going to say absolutely not.
No, because I'd say here's what I believe. I believe Boston fans across the board, not just as spoiled ass millennials that have seen nothing but victories, who've been fans for the last 20 years. But I mean, you and I, Joe, we're the same generation. We experienced our drought, the 86 to 2001 drought that you had, which was during our formative years as sports fans. So we know what it's like.
We grew up not being able to watch the Patriots on television because they sucked.
I know.
They've never sold out. We literally had to listen to the Patriots on the friggin' radio because they were not playing it on TV in Boston because there was nobody in the goddamn stands.
Yeah.
We remember that.
So we've taken our lumps, but I would say your regular fan is a little bit impatient, and I'd say honestly, I've personally have gotten impatient in the sense that, not impatient, but I think we have all learned there is nothing worse than being mired in the middle, okay? Worse than anything. So you would rather go absolutely in the tank and rebuild it and tank for Bedard or the next Bedard or whatever that is, and hope that you're going to hit a lottery ticket, then just be stuck, being the Hartford Whalers. The last thing you want to be is just stuck in nowhere land. So I'm wondering whether the Bruins would ever consider that as a possibility, recognizing we aged out. We've got a couple of good chips. Let's load up. Let's see who will give me 2 first-round picks, 3 first-round picks for a guy like McAvoy, and see what you can do.
Put it this way. I don't think that would happen next year. Okay. I think if it declined over the next couple of years, maybe that would become sort of the long-range thinking. I got to be honest with you. I don't think Don Sweeney and Cam Neely signed up for that, and I don't think they'd want to be a part of that. So I wonder if it really got bad and it went in that direction, if they would have to sort of change who's even running the team at that point. A lot would have to change philosophically. That's the point I'm making to you, is that I think it's going to take time for it to get to that point. I think they've grappled with that over the last couple of years. But I think given the season they're coming off of, given the trades that they've been able to make and the players they've been able to bring in, I think they see a bridge towards continuing to compete now, and continuing to be a playoff team. And I think they see that enough that they're not going to light the bridge on fire and say, screw it, we want the next hotshot kid that's coming out of Thunder Bay, Ontario, that lights up the World Juniors. when he goes there as a 16-year-old. I just don't think they're going to do that. Certainly they're not going to do that in the centennial year where they're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Bruins and the birthday. Like they're going to do that up all year. That's another reason why maybe Bergeron ends up coming back, because I think it's going to be a very special year for the Bruins from beginning to end based on that centennial. And I think they're not going to want the team to suck on ice during that whole pomp and circumstance. But beyond that, a year or two down the line, I think it's going to take a lot for them to get to that point. And maybe it does. Maybe the leadership void when Bergeron is finally gone is not filled up by some of these guys that we're expecting to. Maybe some of these players regress. Maybe some of these players we start to see, sort of behaviors we didn't see when Bergeron was around and keeping them honest. I think there's going to be a lot. When Bergeron leaves, I think it's going to be markedly different for the Boston Bruins organization. And I think that's going to be the test to see, whether that happens, whether they reload, rebuild, whether they tear the whole thing down to the studs and redo it. That's going to happen at some point, I think. But I think we're still years away from that.
All right, it'll be interesting to see, Joe. But again, there's so many things the Bruins can do between now and the start of next season that can completely change the overall composition of this roster. So again, it's hard to... I don't want to get into the doomsday stuff, but it's really hard to know anything. A lot of dominoes to fall, as we mentioned, starting Bergeron, Krejci, see where they go, see if they start to make moves as they might have to, and where they go from there. So more to talk about. Enjoy the Cup Finals, everyone out there. I'll ask you very quickly. Give me your Cup prediction.
Yes. I will give it to you super quick. I'm going to go Florida Panthers in 6 games.
Wow.
I think they're the best team in the NHL. I think they've beaten all the rest of the best teams in the NHL, and I don't, people say they're a team of destiny, whatever. They're a good team.
It's a good team.
They are a good team. They've beaten all the best teams out there. Yeah,
I'm with you. Whether it's 6 or whatever, I think the Panthers win this series too. Once again, reminding you of our sponsors, FanDuel, exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network. Take advantage of a special offer when you go to FanDuel.com/Boston, 1,000 in a no-sweat first bet. Also, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, Factor Meals. Go to factormeals.com/Haggs50. Use that code Haggs50. Get 50% off your first box. Again, Hacks with Haggs. Pucks with Haggs, Hacks with Haggs is available here on the CLNS Media Network at least once a week, possibly more. And as things start to kind of ramp up, we're going to be bringing you more and more hockey coverage. So again, check that out. Make sure you subscribe to Joe's Substack for all of his written work. What is that? What's the URL there, Joe?
That's Pucks with Haggs on Substack. If you Google Substack and Pucks with Haggs, you'll find it.
Go check out Joe's written work there and all of the video work at the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed already, you should. Catch a lot more of Joe's work there throughout the offseason and as we kind of get into next year as well. Thank you guys for hanging out with us on this Bruins-less hockey weekend. And, as the summer kind of rolls on, a lot more to talk about. So we will have more here on the Pucks with Haggs podcast. We will see you guys next time.